to watch this back. So today we are hosting Diana Yardley from Oxford Brookes University. Diana is an advanced nurse practitioner in children's diabetes, of all things, but she's also undertaking doctoral studies. And Diana is with us today to talk about her approach to coding in a constructivist grounded theory perspective. And some of the issues that she's running into. And she's very handily at the end of her presentation added a list of questions that she would like to discuss with everyone here today. So I'm looking forward to that one. So as always, discussions and comments and questions are very welcome. For timekeeping purposes, if we can leave those at the end, that would be helpful. If you have your question and you want to urgently ask it, or at least write it down so you don't forget, by all means put them in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor those as well. And I think the most important thing today is to bear in mind that we aim to be a very friendly seminar group, and that the main purpose of these seminars is to provide peer support and an opportunity to learn together from each other and with each other. So as long as we can all stick within those fairly constructive, broad rules, I'm happy to play, and I will hand over to Diana.
Thank you, Nikki. As Nikki said, I am a children's diabetes nurse. I usually say by day, but actually I don't mean by day. So I am working full-time as trying to do a part-time PhD, which sounded like a good idea at the time, but hey, you're all familiar with how that feels. The invite to share some of the coding experiences came at quite a pertinent time for me, because I was having a bit of a wobble, which I'll talk to you about in a second. So this really is me, it's almost memoing in its broadest form, because it's me brain dumping and going, and where do I go from here? And is this right? Is this not right? What do you think? So I'm really interested to hear what people think. Hopefully you can see the presentation on screen. Perfect, thank you. Yeah, we've already talked about who I am. This is my first real experience of any kind of proper research, because my master's was a literature review. So this is a whole new territory for me, really. Forgive the font, I don't know why it's all in caps. That's just the pretty pictures, and we've got a little C at the beginning, just to, I don't know why, but there we are. So my study, just a bit of background so you know where I'm coming from. As Nikki said, I am a children's diabetes nurse, really, that's the lay term for it. And as very often happens, I think, with postgraduate study, this study has very much come about from the experiences within my workplace. So we feel like as diabetes teams, we spend a lot of time working with families who have additional safeguarding or child protection needs on top of their diabetes. And very often it's not the diabetes that's a problem, or managing the diabetes itself getting in the way of their diabetes not being as well controlled as national guidelines would suggest. It's very often the other things that underpin life, really. So what I'm trying to do is use healthcare experiences to unpick what some of those are, so that hopefully we can pull out at least a degree of consensus, some good ways of working, some not so good ways of working, and trying to just plot out what's happening really in a meaningful way. As it says quite often in some of the literature, actually this stuff is assumed or known but not necessarily documented. So I guess that's part of the idea behind my study. So I'm trying to pick out from those interviews what it is that what influences those families' ability to manage diabetes. Obviously it's from a healthcare professional point of view, so there is a slight slant on that, but the idea is I'm trying to answer my research question as it is here. So are there factors that impact a family's ability to manage their child's type 1, prompting safeguarding concerns for the healthcare team? We know the answer is yes, there are. But in the interest of non-biased approach and all those sorts of things, that's why we've got a very wide question. So I am using constructivist grounded theory approach. Mostly this felt like it fitted me best, being a pragmatist and a symbolic interactionist at the heart of it. It felt like it sat with me most naturally, and I do have an invested interest in the subject because it's something that I've experienced myself. So it just wasn't possible for me to separate myself completely from from the research, because I am living it, and particularly as I'm still working alongside studying. I am currently going through my initial coding. So Sharmaz talks about, obviously you're probably very familiar, using initial coding followed by focus coding. So I am partially way through my line by line coding, which is where I am at the moment. I've completed 5 interviews. I've only transcribed 4 so far. I've been really careful not to move on to transcribing the next one until I've completed the coding of the one that I'm on. So I'm actually currently in the middle of trying to group all of my codes together, and we'll come on to that before, as we go through. But before I move on to code my next interview, I'm trying to transcribe my next interview, trying to get some of those codes sorted, really. I have coded the interviews sequentially. So although the way that I'm about to present them, you've got 1 and 3 together and sort of 2 and 4 together, that's because I've been sort of playing around with the ways that I've done coding, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a second. So interview 1, so I'm using interviews, that's probably become quite evident by now, and I'm interviewing multi-professional teams, diabetes specialist teams. So within that we might have nurses, psychologists, dietitians, doctors of varying ranges of qualification or training. So far I've only managed to recruit nurses and doctors, but the coding is suggestive of the number of the interview and the discipline. So N1 is a nurse by trade. Amazing interview, absolutely mind-blowing in terms of, I think, you know, when you're in the interview, you can feel sometimes how well it's going, how not well it's going. And then when you transcribe it, you kind of get, you relive that experience, don't you? And it's really interesting to go through it again. But I knew while I was in that interview that there was so much information coming out, there's so much experience, so much knowledge, so many elements of that interview that went really, really well. I coded it using NVivo, having had an hour's worth or maybe 2 hours worth. This is how you use NVivo. Maybe a little fly in the ointment in that I'm using a Mac, and Mac for NVivo for Mac is a tiny bit different to NVivo for Word. So it's a little bit of the blind leading the blind a little bit, but I did use NVivo to code that first interview, and I ended up with 270 codes. I felt okay with that. That was fine. That's where we are. We'll just see where we go. And I moved on to transcribe the next interview. Interview 2 was with a doctor, a consultant. So was again really interesting interview, but very different feel from the nursing interview. And I wonder whether that's a theme on its own to begin with, but that's something I have to put a pin in for now. This one, because I'd sort of felt a little bit disconnected by using NVivo, I didn't feel like I was really connecting with the data. I chose to do this one on paper to see if it felt any different. And it sort of did, I suppose, that visuality, the ability to see what I was coding against what, which sometimes it's hard to get from NVivo. That sort of worked a little bit better for me, I think. It was a shorter interview and I've got less codes, but I don't think that's a feature of the system. I think that's a feature of the interview, if that makes sense, because she was just more succinct in her answers and much more, I don't think she was guarded, but it was just a shorter interview. For instance, the first interview was bordering on an hour and 45 minutes. We did have some technical hitches in the middle, which made it longer, but this one was only 47 minutes. So it was quite a different feel, really. So it doesn't surprise me that there are less codes. Interview 3 was a completely different experience for me. So this was another nurse, so N2. She and some of the memo captures that, I think, in terms of I wasn't sure whether it was her, whether it was me, whether we just weren't gelling. The first 2 people are from my local region, not my area, but the network in which I sit. So they knew me, whereas this person didn't know me, and I couldn't decide what had happened there in the interview. And maybe this kind of unsettled me a little bit and led on to some of my confidence crisis that I'm about to talk about shortly. But I thought I'd go back and try NVivo again to see, just to give it best of 3 almost, to see how that felt. And again, I ended up with another 250 codes. Again, it was a longer interview, so a good hour and a half again. And much more descriptive. So nurses, it seems like, to talk a lot more than our medical colleagues do. So again, I wasn't surprised that I got more codes from this one. As I said, cue the confidence of crisis. Whether it was just the interview generally, I asked myself a lot of questions about why didn't it go so well? Was it her? Was it me? Was it the question set? Was it the time of the day? Was it the fact that she'd been on Teams all day long? What wasn't working? Is it that the interviews aren't working? Is it that I'm not asking the right questions? Is my coding wrong? So this is my first code book. So from the first interview, this is the code book that's been pulled out from NVivo. I've taken some of the columns out, obviously, so that you can see them all on the same page. But having a look at these, or having a think about these, I should explain that I'm also just coming to the end of titivation of my literature review. So I've also got the thematic analysis that I've done for my literature review kind of in the background as well. And I had a middle of the night panic, as you do, thinking, actually, am I trying to be too descriptive of what's going on here rather than too analytical about what's going on in the data? So had a complete panic attack, wiped it all and did it all again, because obviously that's the best time investment that you can do. So I went back and I recoded again, and I don't know whether these really look or feel any different. I tried to take, although there's quite a few NVivo's Vivo type quotes at the beginning, the ones in inverted commas, I've sort of used that for my own coding as opposed to coding per se, so that I can pick out that those are the things that really struck me in those interviews. But I did then try and pick out what was happening in a what's going on here way, rather than this is what she's saying, this is what she's saying, this is what she's saying. So it'll be interesting to hear at the end what you think about whether those have changed or not really. So that's sort of an idea of my first versus my second and where we went between the two. And I'm still not 100% sure, which is why I'm here really. As I said, things that were going through my head, was it the interview itself? Was it just the interview that unseated me and made me feel uncomfortable? I'm not sure. I was worried that I had been too literal in my coding. So I went back to the books. I picked up good old Mills and Burks, and I picked up Sharma's, and I watched some interviews with Sharma's, about what she's expecting from the coding and how she likes to do it and how she recommends doing it. As I said, I redid my original interview coding completely and recoded it again, asking those questions rather than trying to use buzzwords or clever titles to explain what was going on. I panicked, asked myself whether it was because I don't know what I'm doing with NVivo? Why can't I use these codes in a meaningful way? Is it because I can't see them all at the same time? Maybe I shouldn't use NVivo. Maybe I should use the coding on paper. So I went to social media. It so happened that a post popped up on the Grounded Theory Facebook group asking something very similar, and I thought, well, I'll just piggyback on the back of that. And there were lots of suggestions, and a lot of people suggested that actually NVivo is great for the coding, but when it comes to the working out how those codes fit together, a lot of people still go back to old-fashioned messaging or old-fashioned methods. So printouts or post-it notes or all those sorts of things. So I took a little bit of faith in that, and also I think that's when Maria emailed me saying, "Are you up for doing this?" And I decided I was being a bit of a wuss and just needed to pull my act together and stop panicking about it and just get on and do it. So that's where I got to. So I have moved on a little bit from there. So as I said, I'd hand code at that point in time. I'd done three transcriptions, 3 codes. I've now transcribed and coded the 4th, and I did the 4th on paper. The 4th was also a doctor. Quite a different interview to the first doctor, definitely more to it. But I've now coded by fluke the doctor's interviews by paper or by hand, and the nursing interviews by NVivo. I've got another interview to transcribe, and I think I'll I don't know what I'm going to do with that one out. Maybe I should do it by hand because she's a nurse, but we'll see. This is an example of the first interview. So the column on the left of the screen in black is the questions, the blue in the middle is their answers, and then on the right hand side of the screen, it's still right if you're looking at it, is how I've coded it. So it gives you an idea of sort of, I wanted to show you what I was doing and what I was pulling out so that you could make a judgment on that or have some suggestions as to actually, am I capturing what's important here? Do I need to be more this? Do I need to be more that? So I'm just going to leave that there for a little minute or three for you to have a look. I've got 4 of these slides, so I'm not sure that it's helpful to show them all, but that's sort of the first one. I'll show you the last one that I've done, and these are sort of slightly earlier questions, so they're not question to question, which would have been more useful, I guess. But again, this gives you an idea of sort of where I am and my approach to coding at the moment, and I guess I'm really interested to know your thoughts on those sorts of things. So I'll leave that there for a couple of minutes as well. Oh, there's another one. I'll put them up a bit later if people really want to look at them. But in the interest of moving on, so this is where I'm up to. So what I've actually done is taken those hand codes, imported them into NVivo, and then coded it against the code. So I've transposed the code into NVivo so that all of the codes are in the same place. I've actually now got over 950 codes, which feels like I'm climbing a mountain, really. I think I've decided I like manually coding them, but it's important to be able to keep them in the same time and space together, I guess. So what I'm currently trying to do is rationalize them outside of NVivo, and that's what the picture on the right is. I was trying to use the Post-it note app, which was working fine right up until it lost about 60 codes, so that didn't go so well, and I had a bit of a meltdown yesterday while that happened. But I guess that's a feature of studying. I like the idea, but I guess it's not a permanent fixture in terms of, I don't know that it's going to be able to hold all of those things in there. I realized that I'm probably not memoing enough as I'm doing my coding to pull out what it is that I'm thinking at that time. So I do realize that I need to have a look at doing that as well. There are some groups of codes, I've called it focusing. I'm not sure that they are focused just at the moment, but there are some things that are coming out. So there are things like the age of the child makes a difference. So, you know, some of my participants have talked about the younger the child, the easier it is to get social services support versus the older the child, the less likely it is that it's possible, or they're given more allowances for being a teenager. Things about, you know, the common theme is actually diabetes adds to the risk of a family that are already stretched, and that's not reflected in social services thresholds. Again, that's almost naming the obvious, really, from our point of view anyway. There's a frustration that often interventions don't make the difference that they need to, so children and families may be supported for a while, but then support withdraws and nothing's really changed, and lots of other things as well. So those are just some of the groups of themes that are coming out, I suppose, that I just wanted to share at this point in time. So, questions for you guys. I guess I'm worried that I'm either over or underthinking the coding. I'm not sure if I'm being analytic enough, whether I'm being too descriptive, whether actually I'm not focusing enough on those actions or those processes, or not really, not focusing in that sort of way. And I'm really interested to know from those of you who've been through it, who are doing it currently, where you're up to, whether you've got any advice, and finally, if you've got any questions for me. I'm going to stop sharing so I can hear you, see your, thank you, Hilary. Oh, pause, no, stop.
Thank you very much, Diana. And in this case, well-deserved virtual round of applause for putting yourself out there. And quite frankly, openly admitting that you're not sure, which is something that many of us don't do, can't do, won't do, whichever you want to give it. But that's putting yourself in that position of vulnerability and saying, look, I'm stuck, I need help, is exactly why we've started running these things, because we've all been there. I have moaned a lot, as have all the others in the organizing group for these committees and everyone in this chat at the moment, but most of us do it in private rather than on a public Zoom call. So well done and thank you very much. Happy to take questions. There's a few comments going around in the chat, but we'll stick with questions first. Considering this is a virtual call, if you could raise your hand virtually, that would be very helpful. The first one to have done that, according to my list, is Pippa. So Pippa, by all means, would you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for that presentation and for being open and vulnerable enough to do that, because I suspect you reflect everybody here. I'm behind you, so I'm about to, I've just done a first interview, but it was a presuppositional one, so it was me. And I thought I'd just start transcribing that and have a practice with coding, and I can just see there are so many different ways to do things, and I've read the books, and I see this big confusing tangle in front of me, and I can imagine that at some point, Diana, I will too be in a crisis of confidence. So so thank you. I just want to say thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing what everyone's got to say, and I'll be taking furious notes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pippa. Jovina.
Hi, thank you. Diana, oh my goodness. Thank you so much for putting yourself out there. Like you, I'm at the beginning stages. I'm a nurse practitioner, and so my dissertation is based on the clinician side of things, on palliative care in where I work. My question to you is, you mentioned that you recoded and then recoded to fit. So do you think there's a danger of fitting the data with what you want it, with how you want it to look like, as opposed to having it, organically generate it, the data generating themselves? Was that part of your reflexivity?
That's not actually quite what I did. Yes, it would be an issue if I was saying these are my codes, does my interview fit into it? Actually, what I did is wipe all of the coding and code it as a blank interview, as if I'd never coded it before, but tried, rather than, I think what I'd done initially is literally give what was going on a title in a descriptive way rather than an analytical way. So I literally deleted all of the codes against it, uncoded the whole thing and reread it again and tried to look at it from a what's going on here, what's she describing, what's happening here, rather than a, this is, I can't think of an example now, but rather than a using safeguarding team as support, it might say something along the lines of safeguarding team provide lots of informal support by proximity or by meetings, or rather than actually these are my codes and how does this interview fit into it. But certainly that's the recommendation, isn't it, that if you're doing that, you do need to absorb that into your reflexivity. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Have we got any follow-up questions? If not, Diana, I'm a bit astounded by the sheer number of codes, and I can fully appreciate that that's very intimidating. I was wondering, so I couldn't quite make it out from the slide. I mean, did you do your interview, then code it, then do your next interview, then code that one, etc.? And was there any overlap between your first and your second interview in codes? Were there codes that followed similar concepts, and therefore, where did the constant comparison fit in?
And I guess that's probably where I'm at the moment, is I have literally gone interview code, interview code, interview code, and I'm only starting to go now, how do these fit together? And I think I'm kind of mixed between, am I doing thematic analysis, am I doing grounded theory? And it's the grounded theory element that means that I need to go back and say, where are the similarities here, isn't it? Actually, what's going on between the 1 and the 2 and the 2 and the 3 and the 1 and the 2 and the 3? And I guess that's what I'm trying to do by looking at all of the codes and figuring out, are there similar codes and do they group together to form a more descriptive analytical code, I guess. And I'm probably not doing enough of that, is the honest truth. So I'm probably not going back to interview 2 or 3 or 1 with 2's codes or 3's codes or whatever. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do. And maybe that's where I'm tripping up.
Because it kind of follows on a bit from what Hilary put in the chat about description, because description itself very much has a place in early coding. You have to start somewhere. You can't straight away jump in from a conceptual level if you don't know what you're actually conceptualizing. So the description is fine, but then through constant comparison, at some point, the description morphs into conceptual coding, where you find that descriptions kind of start doing or describing the same thing.
Yeah.
So I find it very brave that you wiped everything and went back and started from scratch. That would make me cry.
Gives you an idea where I was. Yeah, it was, I don't know if everyone feels the same. I feel sometimes that you're against time generally, and then you kind of go, oh my God, there's so much time that I could have been doing something else with. Hilary's nodding, yeah. So it did give me all of those feels, definitely. Was this a good idea?
Exactly. And I think my second main question would be, because you've been talking a few bits about having struggles with NVivo, and I was wondering, are you coding within the limitations of NVivo, and are we therefore seeing the tail wagging the dog rather than coding, and if it fits NVivo, brilliant, if it doesn't, ditch it and go for something else? Because I've tried NVivo, I'd managed one interview and ditched it and ran away from it as fast as I could because it wasn't working. So I ended up doing most of the coding manually for exactly that reason, because I didn't want to feel constrained by what the boxes looked like. So can you tell us a bit more on how the differences between manual and electronic coding felt?
That's a really good question. And I suppose one of the things that I was curious as to how do people do it. So I don't know that I felt at the coding stage that I was restricted, but then that's maybe why I've got 950 codes, because I would just pick a line and then code it, and I would pick another line and I'd code that. So I didn't feel like it was descriptive necessarily. I think that it's useful in terms of, if I go now to code something new, it will bring up anything that's relative to that. And I think, oh yeah, that does fit with that actually. The thing I found difficult about it is not being able to see how that code, or how those codes relation to each other. So I can't find a way of having all of the codes on screen so that I can say, oh, that one and that one are the same, let me merge those two together. So that's where I'm finding it difficult, and I'm curious to hear what other people are up to, really. I have liked the cataloguing of it. I know I can see Katrina's on here somewhere. I know she's talked about it. Oh, there you are. You've talked about using OneNote for yours previously, and I guess it does the same. And I think Janet did a presentation very early on about your work in India, and I think you were doing something different as well. So yeah, I'm curious to know how people have done it, I suppose. I'm
going to pick up a few things from the chat, and you'll have to apologize me massively if I mispronounce this. Lana had a question or a comment more, but would you like to go for it yourself, Lana?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry for all the caps. My caps lock was on when I was typing in. Yeah, no, I've done the focus coding, and I've kind of come up with conceptual categories. I'm not quite there yet with my theory. But what I felt was I did all the coding by hand. I had focus group interviews. I had a focus group interviews. I did all by hand. And Shamaz talks about using Garons. I'm probably saying that word wrong, but do you know what I'm saying? Garons, whatever it's called. Anybody can pronounce it better than me. Which is like an action word ending in ing. And I found that using that really embedded me in the data at the initial kind of coding stage. And I wonder, would that help you, Diana, or if you used it? Because I'm sorry, I was struggling to see your codes and get at them. But I found that really, really helpful. And that's really, I suppose, I don't know whether it's a question to you or just kind of, you know, I'm just throwing it out there that's what I found helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not consciously, I suppose. Not consciously is the answer. I'm just trying to think whether she describes the gerunds, whatever you want to call them, as the ings in what they're doing or the ings in what we're seeing. And I guess I'm struggling to understand that a little bit. I have tried to be more what is happening rather than, which feels like a bit more of a gerund, rather than imposing what I think is happening, if that makes sense.
There's a few comments around using, and I'm not even going to attempt to, I'm just going to call them ing words, using ing words in the chat. And I find it something that I had to actively force myself to do in the first place. And it took a long time to get used to it. But in response to that question, I took it as to be my interpretation of what my participants were doing, because obviously they're active words. So there's a bit of interpretation there. But for example, my participants were worrying about whatever they're worrying about according to what they were describing. But I found after I managed to force myself to do that, merging codes into low-level concepts became easier because they were active things. But it's hard. It's you have to force yourself. I mean, did anyone else struggle with using gerunds initially? It's not a natural thing to do. Katrina.
First of all, Anna, smashed it. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to say two really annoying things. One, when I was coding, I wrote somewhere, I have a big chalkboard in front of me, so probably, it's still up there, very annoying. I wrote processes and actions. Chalmers goes on about this a lot, and at the very beginning, I think there's also a reflection, the annoying thing that I'm going to say is trust the process of grounded theory, and it's something Maria and I spoke about, I think last week, or the week before. I'm at the end of term, I'm not sure what day is. And by trusting the process, we know how old grounded theory is, and yet it grows as we change in society. That's how I perceive kind of research methods. But that kind of actions and processes, and that kind of like, yeah, we all go through it like, oh my goodness, what on earth, I'm just making it up. You know, and I didn't use a computer because I hate computers. So I was just, you know, pen and paper, big pens, you know, felt tip pens, got a chalkboard in front of me, living my best life. And that's why we do like that kind of just lots of notes. And I wouldn't necessarily delete anything. I think you'll go back over it, and sometimes something clicks and then you come back to it. And, you know, so you do everything you're doing, keep coding, keep reading, keep interviewing. And surprisingly, one day I'm walking along I'm in Norfolk walking the dog on the beach, and I'm like, oh, and, you know, things just kind of happen like that when you give yourself the space. And sometimes it was when I wrote a memo, or, you know, and sometimes, you know, Hillary's on my internal panel, and sometimes she's like, that's a terrible, terrible concept you have. That isn't too descriptive. It's not got anything. So, honestly, some of my internal reviews are just brutal. But they're very helpful for the way you think about it. trying to explain those concepts to other people help as well, because obviously I'm in the world of judo and sport, and you know, people, my partner is like, oh my gosh, shut up about athlete education, no one cares. People do care, by the way, just not in my household. And it's that, like, trust the process, keep going through it, keep asking people, and then what happens is you have all this data and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this kind of comes together. And I think when I'm working with students who are doing thematic analysis, there's a lot of patterns. But when I'm grounded theory, I'm kind of more in that kind of, you know, what's the actions and what are the processes and why is that significant and how does that relate to that one? Whereas my understanding of thematic analysis is that, you know, we look for patterns and how do we make this big data set into this, and how can I get an undergraduate to understand research in the 12 weeks that I have them? Whereas grounded theory is just like, because you are making that kind of theory. So those two annoying things, processes and action, and trust the process and trust yourself. And qualitative research is so fabulous because you can just, not, like, I couldn't do your research because I've not got your background, I've not got your experience. And so that unique insight that you bring is why, you know, grounded theory, or why qualitative research is so fabulous and unique, because we won't believe it. So, you know, all that experience that you bring as the practitioner, there is an element of different elements of research in that anyway. So get confidence from that. And then imagine all the undergraduates that we teach, and then you're way up there. So that makes a difference. But thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sorry I have annoying things to say about, you know, trusting the process. So annoying. Someone said that to me in my first year. Just want to bop them on the nose.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. Not at all annoying. And I have a whiteboard. I need to write action and process on top of that. Thank you. And get a dog and move to Norfolk.
It's the trusting the process. I mean, it's a stupid thing. I mean, I'm Glazer, not so much through and through anymore, but I started through and through. And the most annoying thing that he could have said was, might as well been a bloody Nike commercial on just do it. I think, yeah, but how? Why? What? And this is why this group is so good, because we help each other, because it is hard to trust in something that is so difficult to trust, because it relies so much on your own doing and feeling incredibly inadequate. I'm just having a quick scroll through the chat because there were a couple of more things popping up. Hillary asked a question, and I think this is a nice one to pick up because we're talking about coding. Do we need to do line-by-line coding, or are we looking for chunks of data, or rather ought we be led by what is in the data? Hillary, would you like to elaborate a bit on what you mean with the last bit?
Yeah, I think there's sometimes a tendency to think we have to do something with every word in our transcript or the data that's in front of us, when actually we don't have to do that. We are looking to answer a research purpose or a research question fundamentally. And I think there's also a temptation to code line by line, because then we might not miss anything. But if we code line by line, we're actually perhaps missing some of the context around the important part in that line. And sometimes another part of that chunk of data, if you like, could be coded somewhere else. But unless we've got those chunks of data linked together, we can't actually understand how the contexts around the important part of that bit of data, if you like, are linked together. So I do sometimes think there is a tendency, it's a bit like, you know, the highlight markers, you know, when you've got a paper and you think, oh, I'm going to highlight the important bits, and the next thing you know, you've coloured in the whole thing just with different colours, kind of thing. And what we're doing is we're actually forgetting to take the important bits out of the coloured in bits. And I think when we do line by line coding, we are sometimes forcing or oversaturating, if you like. And I think sometimes we need to think about things in that sort of chunkier kind of way. What is this section of data telling me? What is this paragraph of this bit of speech quotation, if it's interview data, for example, telling us? And that might help us both understand both the description, i.e. what is going on, the ing bit, what's going on here. And it also might help us move on to that conceptualization bit of how do these ings, these descriptions of going on, build this story about the important bits, the important actions, the important things that's going on in the data. I think possibly we all need to just think about this and sometimes a little bit more intelligently and think, am I lining here? Sometimes it might just be a single word that you need to code, but we need to be led by the data, not by our fear of either missing something. We you know, as you say, we're going to go back and we're going to revisit. We have to do that because it's a constant comparison. So we will pick up on other things, but I think we just need to be aware that sometimes we can force things because we're so scared of missing things, I guess. That
Yeah,
makes
I
sense.
think that's a valid point. Sharmaz talks about moving fast and moving quickly and not overthinking it. And I wonder whether I've missed that point a little bit in my absolute need to grasp everything. And I have found that some of my initial codes for the first couple of interviews, and this is the reason I do like in vivo, is I'm like, well, what does that mean? What does that relate to? And what you can then do is click on it and see what that guest theory
Yeah,
is.
that is indeed the beauty of the in vivo. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I think you've hit there that tension, if you like, between needing to move fast as well, because you're doing it in a time-bound process. You know, you've got a doctorate to complete. You've got it within a finite amount of time to do it. And you're probably having to produce stuff for your supervisors and things as well. So there's all these different pressures that are going in that kind of pushed you to do things. But actually sometimes, and I think this is for all methodologies, it is that thing to just stand back a little bit and just have a think of, what is it that I'm doing here? What is it I need to do here? And not feel that drive to constantly push forward. Sometimes that period of thinking and reflection, and it may look as if it's being inactive because you're not filling words on a page, but the thought processes that's going on actually is the thing that takes you to that next leap of what's next, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that's been today's been useful in that alone, is it's given me the opportunity to think about it and actually document what I'm thinking about and how that's working.
Thank you. We have some more hands pop up. I've kind of missed who was first, Pippa or Janet, but I believe it was Pippa. Yes, Janet is honest enough to say yes. So Pippa?
I was going to ask everybody, so when you've got these, so Diana, you were saying about, you know, you're interviewing number one and then you're interviewing number two, and then Nikki raised about the constant comparison. But how do you do that? How do you keep track of your codes? Is in vivo the way to do that? How do you do that if you're doing it by hand? And how do you then, if you come up with hundreds of codes, how do you then draw them together to find similarities? Or is that just that intuitive stuff in your head?
Hey, does anyone have any sensible suggestions? I mean, this is good. It's something that will look slightly different for everyone because it's how you do your research. I mean, for me, I didn't use NVivo, but I used a program called Taget, which is basically NVivo Lite. And it literally just allows you to highlight snippets on a page and put a code against them. And that's all it will allow you to do, and then search that. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a smarter way of doing it. And
did you do your coding straight into that?
I coded straight into that, mainly because it will allow me to then, after the interview, download the list of codes and the snippets against them so that I had them ready for when I was then doing the next one. So it was a bit of a backhanded way of doing it, but it kind of sat between manual and digital.
Okay.
Anyone else found any? What are your coding strategies in doing the? So Katrina says OneNote and diagrams. Yeah, I did a lot of scribbling. I'm a scribbler, I'm afraid. Anyone else who's currently coding? Is anyone in the coding process at the moment brave enough to say, this is what I'm doing? Alison says diagrams. Nice, another one for the diagram crew. Nikki says used Word. I'm assuming you mean Microsoft Word, Nikki.
Yes, yes, I do. I use Microsoft Word. So I use the new comment part. So I did put the transcript on one side and then use the new comment. So I commented, and going to Hillary's point as well, it can be very, I don't think it's very meaningful to try and code line by line, because then when I started my first transcript, that's what I tried to do, because I read everywhere where it said, oh, use line by line, and I tried to do that, and it's not literally doing that. But then as I progressed, I started using chunks, and then it became more meaningful. And that's when I also started using gerunds, and not, it's also impossible. It was impossible for me to use gerunds through and through. There were some parts where I used, because if you read Chalmers as well, it says you've got to use the participants' words. So in some places I was using, so what they call in vivo, instead using participants' words and gerunds. So I used a combination of both on Word. So adding new comment to me worked on Word.
Thank you very much. We've got some more in the chat. So Lana says clustering diagrams, memos, and post-it notes. Oh, the good old post-it note. It's the best tool of any researcher, regardless of what you're doing. Grace says Word document with comments too, pen and paper. Maria started on NVivo and then used comments in Word. So I think for most, myself included, a lot of us kind of shift between methods. And I think we're kind of very often running into the limitations of one system and then try to change something to make up for those limitations. Yeah, you have to find something that fits for you, but a lot of it will just rely on brain capacity, I think. We've got Janet with a hand, and then I think we've got Hillary with a finishing question, because we've got about 10 minutes left.
Hello. I use NV. I'm in a hotel reception. It's quite exciting. People eating their food around me. In London, it's dead exciting because I'm a northern girl. Anyway, I use NVivo, but only to sort of like highlight the text, make a code in the column, and then I've got the trail, and then those ones in the column I then put onto my numbers chart and then put a memo next to it, and then I can add another column, which I then group them together into a category. So, but my question was really not to do that. It was about, I'm just really interested that you do an interview and then you code it. And I know Nikki did the same, and then had a series of interviews. So you interview, you code. Whereas I guess partly because I was in India, but I did 6 focus groups and 2 interviews. Then I transcribed, then I coded them all. So I'm just quite interested that you did it one by one. And therefore, if you did an interview and then you coded it, did you not use those same, is this how you progress then? So did the codes in your first one become the questions for your second one? Do you know what I mean? So that, because that's like so when I go back in May the 21st, I booked the flights, which is immensely exciting also. So I'm using the codes which I've put into categories, and each category will have a question to inform the next phase. So I don't see why you have to code each interview before you do the next. I'd like to understand a bit more, because surely one interview will inform the next.
Yeah, that whole theoretical sampling picture.
That's kind of the word I was looking for, but couldn't remember indeed.
I struggled as well. I interpreted the instructions, and I'm not sure now whether it was Sharma specific that you should do it that way. Initially, my plan had been, when I submitted my RDC and my ethics proposal, was that I would do groups and then code them together, because I thought that would be easier to manage in terms of timeframes, etc. But then when I went back or did more training or more discussions with more groups, I interpreted it that it should be 1 versus 1 versus 1 versus 1. I am hearing what's being said about the whole, how do you know how they fit together if you're not using the codes against the next one, balancing in my own mind, but I don't want to influence or fit that data to those codes, which is why I've got 950. I haven't yet revalidated or re-looked at my interview schedule in terms of using the codes. That's sort of on the whole supervisory plan to look at whether that schedule's working. And although these interviews, I suppose, are part of the bigger project, they're almost a little bit of a pilot as well to work out, is this pulling out the data I'm hoping it will pull out that, is it pulling enough of this? Is it pulling enough of that? And the interesting thing is they've all been so different. It's difficult to know that at the moment. So I haven't yet, I don't feel like I'm at the point, maybe I am, maybe I need to take that leap, that my codes can inform the questions, because they're just this huge abstract ball of wordness. And I suppose that's a struggle, but that would be the next sort of couple of.
So all your current interviews are like phase 1, I guess.
Yeah.
And, okay. And can I, so, you know, do you not, I think I just wanted to make it simpler, because I recoded everything as well and made it simpler and used Garun. So I've done a similar process, but then if I found 2 people in different groups had talked about a similar thing, I coded it together. So like for me, that could be bunking off is what they call it. So they don't bother turning up. So I have a code about bunking, and so everybody who mentioned anything to do with that all went under that code. So then I could look up bunking and see the 10 references that all related back to it through in vivo. Whereas if yours might be safeguarding, safeguarding is worrying, or, you know, or children in poorer families find it harder. So, but if 4 people mention something around that, do you not code them all together, or do you have one code per one line sort of thing?
Currently, I have one code per one line, which is, I guess, I'm feeling like after today, thank you, if I can group those codes that I've got together, that will be giving me that actually these people are all saying the same thing. So that is a code. So exactly that actually I've got these 4 people that have now discussed getting across a threshold for intervention.
I get what you mean, yeah.
So they're coded individually, but my vision is, or my thinking would have been, or is that I can then use the constant comparison method. So this is happening in these.
Yes, yes,
what
yes.
does this mean for all of them? So
I get you. So your overall category might, for example, be safeguarding, but within that you might have several codes of like it, worrying, very difficult, hugely significant, doesn't matter at all. So you might have different people who talked about it, but under the heading of sort of thing. I see. Okay, so that was really helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we all worry that we're just doing it wrong because we don't know, but there's just maybe lots of different ways of doing it. Maybe
we've got time for one more question. I think the hand chung is Javina. Hillary, I'm going to be a bit rude, but I'm also thinking that what you would said about wanting to explore is a fairly large topic, which will probably fill a whole seminar on itself. So would you mind if we make that a seminar instead of a question? Yes, all right. Javina, last one for today then.
Yes. This will be a quick question. Diana, are you doing second interviews with your participants? No?
No, I saw that in the chat. Thank you. No, the plan is it's a one-stop shop. And not annoyingly, but actually what would have been intriguing is that what quite often happens, because this is a concept that people don't often get the opportunity to think about and reflect on in practice necessarily, it's challenging them to think about what I'm asking them to think about. And a follow-up interview would be really interesting because they'd have the opportunity to think about it, to then frame what it was that they'd be saying the next time. So if I was designing it again, then I might do repeat interviews with the same group of people, but the plan is individual interviews once.
Cool. Thank you very much. There are a few more comments and questions in the chat, but Maria, if I'm not mistaken, the chat is going to be part of the recording, isn't it?
It will, yes.
So we can always follow this up after the seminar, and if anyone has any burning questions, etc., by all means, email Maria via the contact that you have with her already, and then we can pass on questions as they are required. We've got a few comments about following Corbin and Strauss, which is a very helpful reminder on brainstorming, which relates to what Hillary has now coined and will be in GT law forever, dirty coding. So from now on, we have a concept of dirty coding in the GT law.
And that is Thomas said it. Somebody even more important than Hillary said it at one point, but I can't.
Nobody is more important than Hillary.
My mistake. Sorry. Yeah, I apologize.
But there's a couple of things go along the same lines. Pace some questions. Grace is worried that she's the only one following Corbin and Strauss. I feel your pain because I vaguely remember attending a conference where Maria was hosting, where I was the only Glazerian grounded theorist, and there was nobody there for Corbin and Strauss. I was the only one in a whole 100 or so of constructivist grounded theorists, but I'm sure you're not the only. And then, yes, perfect. And you read my mind, Hilary, which is a bit scary. Grace, considering you are the sole representative of Corbin and Strauss / Strauss and Corbin, would you be interested in doing a presentation for a future seminar on the intricacies of Corbin and Strauss? I don't need an answer now. I don't want to put you on the spot, but please be in touch if you don't want to give an answer now.
Yeah, I'll definitely think about it. I guess it would just depend on exactly what you were looking for. I'm not sure I'd be qualified to give a whole methodological seminar, but I'd be happy to try something.
You're the only one in this group, which makes you eminently qualified. I think we have the next one is in May, which you've got a topic for, so it would be probably a month or 2, 3 after that one. So there's plenty of time to think about it, but I'll get Maria to chase you up. But I would love to hear some Corbin and Strauss because I've been avoiding their work for some reason, not intentionally, but right. In that case, I would like to round up today's session. First of all, thank you very much to Diana for putting herself out there, and a very, very big round of applause for doing so. Diana, I hope that this has been very useful to you to have the discussion, because that's what you were mainly after, if I'm not mistaken. I think all in all, to answer your first question, I'm worried I'm doing it wrong. There is a very resolute no. It is not wrong. It is just a learning and developing process. And as you become more confident in your coding, it will become easier. But you're not doing it wrong. Nobody is. Yeah, we all do it slightly differently. And I think that's a key thing to take home when we're learning as a group, is that everyone does this stuff slightly differently. This is the key thing of qualitative research. Video and chat will come your way. Thank you very much, everyone, for your constructive contributions, interest, chats, humor, and laughs. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next one.
Thank you very much.